What's brewing?
Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
What's brewing, Lars?
What's brewing? This time, it's Clayton's coffee from Brazil. That we call yellow. Very yellow. Some yellow fruits, but also a very yellow can, you know?
Anyway, what's brewing today, apart from yellow, is we're going to talk about how coffee actually becomes coffee.
Coffee, yeah.
In a cup.
In a cup.
From a plant to
Or
a little cherry.
Even from a seed.
From a seed to a plant.
Oh, yeah.
To
what
cherry.
we eventually brew and drink.
Yeah. All the steps from seed to cup,
Yeah.
basically.
So, coffee is, what we drink is basically the seed of the fruit. So...
Why do we call it beans then?
Yeah, you could say, I think you could say seed, you could say beans, but I think when you determine it as seed, it's the potential to grow. It has the potential to germinate, but with the coffee we drink, we've sort of dried it so much that it's not going to be possible to, and we've sort of taken out the things that will make it germinate. So so it becomes more of a bean. I think that's probably
Feels like a commercial thing.
Yeah, but the thing with the green bean is, we're going to get to that, but that's not going to germinate. It's not going to be, it's not a seed anymore. But coffee, as I said, it starts with the seed, and inside the fruit, the two seeds. I'm going to try to crack these. These are dried. We don't have any fresh cherries here, but give me 1 second.
2 hours later.
Basically, within the fruit, there's usually, like most often, there's two beans with their flat sides to one another. So they're like basically like this, boom. And those are covered with a couple of different layers, such as parchment, such as the silver skin, a couple of there's a lot of sugar in there. And the seed, as long as it's covered like that, it's going to keep its germination possibilities, the capabilities. So it's going to be able to germinate. So if it's still moist, it's still, and when we put it in the ground, it's gonna pop up like a it's going to germinate and pop up like a plant. And that's basically what we've seen here. What happens is we put the seed in the ground, and it germinates, and after several weeks it starts coming up as a small little soldier. Basically the bean comes up on top like a head, and then a small little stem. That's right. And then the bean starts opening up, and then starts developing the leaves, the first set of leaves, and those are the two in the bottom. And then as it grows, it continues to develop its root system, it picks up a little bit of nutrients, and it keeps on adding layers of leaves. And what we usually do is we bring it up to like 30-40 centimeters of height before we plant it out in the field. And then go out in the field and you plant, depending on which variety it is and depending on the terroir and basically the terrain, we can plant some 4,000 trees per hectare, which is it's quite a lot of trees.
How many days does that take?
Yeah, it takes a couple of days. Yeah. No, but so I mean, it's a few months before we get it to the stage where it's plantable in the field. And then you usually want to plant it during the rainy season when you've got loads of water to sort of get humidity in the soil, and then as soon as it's sort of rooted in that new position, it will continue to grow, and then it's just a matter of tending to it, like giving it the care it needs, and then eventually 3 years down the line you can start seeing the first. It will come up to maybe a half a meter. Then you'll see more of a tree shape to it, and then you can basically start seeing also the flower developments.
So how long does it take for us from a seed to be able to harvest?
Yeah, it's in the best sense I would say 3 years, but more conservatively like 4 or 5 years for a significant harvest at least. So that's why we're up this season coming on, and in the break of this year we're going to have our first crops from El Pital that we planted for like 4 years. So that's it's pretty cool.
But El Salvador, like the Big Monday coffee, is from El Pital.
Yeah, and but that's also from the close neighbors around. But we've had some old trees that have been in production, so that we've just renovated. But the fresh ones are, of the new varieties, are geishas and aaall 28s and a couple of different ones that are that'll be interesting.
Geisha, that's my favorite.
It is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, obviously, 3-4 years into the cycle, the coffee starts producing, and obviously, what it produces is back to the sort where we started, like the fruit. And from the cycle of where it starts flowering to where the fruit is mature to pick is basically like a pregnancy. It's like a 9-month waiting time. So it develops, it flowers, it pollinates, it develops the fruit. The fruit comes out green, and then it starts adding size, and it starts adding the sugars, and it develops all the way to a red ripe cherry, or a yellow if you were talking a yellow catuai like Clayton's, for instance. And then when it's mature, it has collected all of those sugars and all of those flavors, and that's when we pick it. And then sort of the cycle is back to where we could either plant it again to bring out the next generation, or we can just keep on drying it and make it coffee. And making it coffee is obviously what we're drinking today is what we call the natural process, and that's basically just taking these, like cherry dried, basically taking these fresh cherries, leaving them out in the sun, but keeping really close track of it. Not too thick of a layer. We want to have a thin layer, maybe on tables that are ventilated, so we get airflow through. And then we want to continue moving these as they sun dry. And then the sun is going to take care of the drying part, and it's going to take up to 30 days maybe, depending on obviously the temperature and the winds. And as the moisture sort of evaporates and they dry up, we get to contain a lot of that, like obviously the cherry and the berry flavors that sort of gets packed all the way into the seed that's in the center of it. And that's why we get a flavor of that coffee that is more like red fruit, dried fruit. Like you get so much of that, and it also sort of increases the body of the coffee, I would say.
How many different varieties do you think there are to process coffee?
Different ways of processing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many different varieties of processing?
Different ways of processing. This is the most the natural one, so to say. The next one, we're talking 3 different ones that are the big ones, but then the variations are now endless. Like you can maneuver and make small changes into basically everything. So we have the natural, and then the next one we have is when we instead, if we go honey or a semi-washed is when we take the fresh cherry and we depulp it. So we take off the skin and the fresh fruit, the flesh, and then out comes the bean with a parchment skin with all the sugars intact. And what we do with that is just put it under the sun and we dry it, and that's what we call honey. And what it sort of happens is that sugary mucilage, they kind of cling together and they get sticky. So we get, it looks basically like, in Sweden we have kalaspuffar. I don't know what the English word is.
Honey puffs.
Honey puffs, is it?
Aren't they called that?
Maybe,
I think so.
So, but it looks really delicious and it tastes really sweet. And obviously that, what you basically get is you've taken out the skin and the fruit, but you have all the sugars basically left. So what you get is like a semi, like in between. Like you don't get that fruity natural flavor, but you get enhanced sweetness and a little bit of body as well. And then the third big one is what we call the washed coffee, and that takes again depulping the fresh cherry, and it comes out with the mucilage, but instead of drying it right away, we put it to ferment. And what's going to happen is that the natural microbacteria in the ambience are going to start eating on the sugars, and basically it's the same type of fermentation that goes on when you make wine or beer, but we're not looking to make the liquid with the alcohol. We're actually just looking to get rid of the mucilage. Could be definitely could be coffee liquor thing made of the ferments.
Has it been done?
Probably, yeah.
And is it good?
Probably not. But so and once it ferments, it starts breaking down that mucilage. So when we then wash it in clean water, we get rid of that mucilage. So out comes the bean, which is just a pure parchment bean without the sugars. And what we get with this processing is a more elegant, more sort of not as full-bodied and not as like towards that sort of funky red fruit flavor, but more enhanced like citrics or florals, or like a little bit more. I was going to say sophisticated, but doesn't necessarily mean sophisticated. But you can sort of get a certain elegance with it that comes with washing coffee.
Does that correlate with, because last time we spoke about the like highest rate coffee, does a process like this correlate with the higher score of a coffee as well? Like, is it usually like, oh, it's always a washed coffee that is scored the highest?
No, actually not. It's because the processing is key. How you know what you do and how you perform it. So you can do a meticulously well done natural process that has all the parameters correct, and then you get the flavors that are just super clean, juicy, very fruity and floral as well. Or you could make a washed coffee that is equally good, or the other way around. It's just depending on the farmer and the protocols and making sure that you know what you do. So there's no one that's better than the other one in all cases. But in some cases, that might be that, okay, wow, this coffee is better as a natural, or this might be, depending on.
But you can definitely place it, like if you have a certain palate. Say I like a more round sweet coffee versus a berry-ish acidic coffee.
Could be different, yeah.
It still could be different.
Yeah. You can have. I mean, on the natural coffee side, you get that when you get a little bit of that funky, fruity, berry kind of flavors. A lot of people like that, and also because when you taste it the first time, it's like wow, and sometimes it's like when we start talking blueberries in coffee, for instance, it's something that maybe most people just get when they taste it, like wow, I understand what you're saying, like it really tastes like blueberries or whatever it could be. Whereas some of the other flavor descriptors are more nuanced and maybe demands a little bit of a more experienced coffee taster to sort of get. But and then once it's processed, everything once it's washed, it goes to dry as well. And and obviously the drying of coffee that is in parchment compared to fresh cherry is a lot quicker. It's like half of the time. So like 2 weeks or something that we dry it, and once it's dried, we can send it to the dry mill, and we either send it, which we do with the dry cherry, or we with the parchment, and out we get, which is the final exportable product, is the green bean, and that's the dry mill works basically as a big thresher. It sort of just gets rid of that dry parchment or that dry cherry, gets it out, and then we're able to reveal the final green bean. And then obviously the green bean, when you look at this, for instance, it's not sorted at this sample, so we get a lot of the different shapes and the different colors, and we get some defects because not all the coffees are going to be perfect. So depending,
eat it.
It's going to be really dense, so it's going to be.
I know, but
really,
it feels
really
like
tough.
it's going to be like soft, like pistachio or something.
Try it. You can try it. You're going to be chewing on it for a while. But and that sorting is basically super, super key, because obviously we don't want all the defects, or we don't want. I mean, it's depending on what you're looking for, obviously. But defects we don't want, but we want the high quality beans, so we're going to sort that out. But then, obviously, there's always the need. There's no farmer in the world that's going to bring out like 100% perfect beans. It's like the same when you look at a farmer that farms carrots or potatoes. Not all of them are going to be like 100% straight, spot on. So it's important to look at it, like the big picture.
But how does that affect the flavor of the coffee if you have a defect? Is that kind of the same if you have a bruise on
so you actually classify them as different types of defect. We have got primary defects and secondary defects, and to make it easy, basically the primary defects are, you don't want any primary defects because that's just sour beans and blacks and like that. Just we get one of them in a cup or in a pot when you make a liter, it's going to ruin the whole batch. And then secondary defects could be a little bit minor in like they don't affect us much, but still. But then when we talk in micro lots like specialty like this, we don't want any defects. So basically we sort it out all to the perfection of 0 defects. And obviously that's a time consuming job, and it's also like leaving weight behind. So obviously we're going to elevate the price because it. But sorting is key, and once it's sorted, we can bag it in a grain pro bag, which is like a plastic lined bag that goes inside of the traditional jute bags that you've basically seen for hundreds of years, shipping coffee all over, and then it's ready to ship basically. So we can ship it, and we bring it here either to where we're sitting right now at our headquarters, and we can roast it here. Or with our partners, like we're roasting with Björklunds Kafferosteri in Västerås, and he's actually doing the majority of our roasting. He has the same type of machine, a Loring Smart Roast, a 30 kilo Loring. So he's able to roast on the recipes that Benjamin, our head roaster, sort of sets on this roaster downstairs. And since it's a closed system, they behave really equal, the two roasters, even though they're like 120 kilometers apart, so he can roast it to our preference, and he can pack it in our bags, and that's part of the beauty with our model is that we don't necessarily need to build our own roastery because there's so many roasters.
We already have.
Which we have. Yeah, we have a small roaster.
We need another one.
Yeah. But as we scale, it's part of the thing. Like looking at the beer industry, because a lot of craft brewers, they start their own brand or their own brewery, but they don't necessarily build their own brewery to begin with. They start using overcapacity with other brewers. And it's the same in coffee. Like there's a lot of roasters that has the capacity to do a lot more volume, and that's just unused capacity. So if we can collaborate with fellow coffee roasters and friends in the industry to roast more coffee, that's just great.
And sustainable.
It's sustainable. Utilizing the same capacity, the capacity is already there. And then obviously the roasting, I'm going to leave that to an episode where Benjamin can go through roasting, like pinpoint that. Because roasting, he's going to be angry with me if I start talking roasting and he's not involved.
That's true. But we do roast the coffee.
We get the coffee roasted for sure. And once it's out as a roasted bean, depending on, obviously what happens during roasting is we're losing a lot of the moisture and breaking up the bean. So now it becomes actually not as dense as the green bean. So now we can crush it.
So now I can eat it.
Now you can eat it. Now you can bite into it. And you can basically see that with like me or Benjamin or any other people that usually roast coffee. You can see them when you walk into a roastery. Most coffee roasters, they stand with a couple of beans and they eat them all the time because you can get a hint of the flavor of the coffee already just eating the dry bean.
I kind of like it. It's a good snack.
It's a good snack, yeah. That's why some shops do them chocolate covered as well. It's a delicacy apparently. But what you once you've gotten rid of that moisture, you also, the bean opens up and it becomes more brittle, so now you can actually grind it, and that's what the next important step. So, and when we're talking grinding, it's breaking this bean down to hundreds or thousands of parts, and the size of the grind depends on what type of brewing method you're gonna brew the coffee with. Yes,
and I want to talk about the dosage of coffee and the level of the grind.
So yeah.
So my dad, for example, he's like a traditional dude, and he's like, I'll just put more scoops in, and it gets stronger.
Stronger, yeah.
But that's not entirely true, is it?
it actually gets stronger, but it's important to look at it. I mean, the difference in grind size has to do with the time that the water is in contact with the grounds, with the coffee. So the shorter the time, the finer the grind. Good rhyme to it. But so when we make espresso, it's a contact time of basically only 25-30 seconds. So that's a really, really fine grind, because we want to make sure we can extract as much flavor as possible during that short period of time.
So finer grind means stronger coffee.
Finer grind means it's easier to extract, so you can draw out the flavor from it in quicker time. Whereas if you look at like a French press, which is a really coarse grind instead, you steep it for maybe 4 minutes before you press it. So that's a much longer contact time. So that's basically how you position yourself. What in the grind sizes, like which brewing method am I going to use, and then obviously the dosing comes to part. So if you start adding more coffee, you're obviously gonna add more coffee in regards to the same amount of water. It's gonna be stronger. But what you're gonna do is that you're not necessarily gonna extract all of that, because the more coffee you add, the more difficult it's gonna be to extract the flavor into the water. So basically you're gonna end up with strong coffee, but when you have the used grounds in your coffee maker, there's a lot of potential still in there that you're just going to toss into the trash bin. Yeah. Because it didn't match up the recipe. So if you have a well-calibrated grind and a well-calibrated dosing in regards to the water that you're using and the amount of water, then you can extract full flavor with the correct strength.
Because he's the traditional, double scoop per cup of water. Yeah,
and it's unfortunately that's part of also the issue where we're spending so much coffee that just ends up in the trash, or just like it's the same like when you brew too much coffee and then you let it sit in the pot and then it gets cold and then you just toss it out in the drain.
Exactly. Tip on that: freeze it in ice cubes and use it for cold coffee, iced coffee. Just add some milk or whatever. And don't throw it away.
And then I think also in his sense, what he enjoys is he enjoys the power of it, like he the strength. What he's looking for is basically what he should be looking for is just finding a bean that is more suitable for his flavor profile, then just also depending on the roasting. I mean, he tends to, from what I hear, sort of like a powerful coffee that could be more of a darker roast.
Yeah, exactly, which is kind of a silly thing, because obviously I didn't know so much about coffee before I started working here and become a bit precious about it, obviously. But talking to him, it's like he's just a traditional dude who's like, I just want strong black coffee. Yeah. And it's just so silly, because it's like, but are you really drinking? Are you enjoying coffee? How do I convince him to do the right thing?
Yeah. No. but you should be able to convince him to use less coffee, because that's just waste. Like basically just using too much coffee for the amount of water. That's just doesn't make sense.
I've told him this, but he
teach him to brew it properly, and give him the example, like this is how you're supposed to brew this coffee. And use the proper grind size and the proper dosing for that what he wants to make. The intention is to extract all that flavor that was built in all the way from when it was a seed and when it was grown in the farm and when the fruit developed and everything. So we want to make sure that we can bring that flavor all the way through to the final cup. So that's and if we've managed to do that, that's then mission accomplished, because that's the goal. So that's how coffee becomes coffee.
There's so many questions, but it's all the time. But anyway, after this whole process, this is what we end up with. Look at
we bag it.
Great coffee.
Obviously, and talking about the bag, it's important to coffee is a fresh product. Once you roast it, it's really the flavors deteriorates much quicker. So
yeah, that's actually a good question, because I know that a lot of people think that coffee lasts kind of forever.
Yeah, and it really doesn't. Like flavor wise, the best you would get, but At the same time, as soon as it left the roaster, I would say that the coffee is a little too fresh to drink because it's so much like processing, chemical processes and developments that have occurred during the roasting process that we've accumulated a lot of gas, and it needs to degas, and it needs to, in order for the flavors to sort of come through. So the first 10 to 14 days, the coffee is going to have too much CO2 in it, and that's kind of high in some of the true flavors.
So you're saying you should let it rest for a couple of weeks before you open it?
Yeah.
As soon as you receive it?
Exactly, yeah. As you know, look at the roasting date and then wait for a couple of weeks after the roasting date at least. And maybe I would say that the peak of flavor is probably within the first 15 weeks from roasting or whatever, something like
15 weeks.
Yeah, but then it doesn't mean that the coffee is bad because it's gone over that time. I mean, it's not like fresh meat that's going to be bacteria and things
exactly.
that are going to be.
But I know that I've had friends and stuff like that who've had, say, a summer house, and they left a pack of coffee during winter and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, we have coffee, that's awesome," and I'm like, "No,
it's probably gonna taste more of the shelf that it was on, or the cupboard that it was in, rather than the origin of that bean, because it's been so long since it was roasted." Or
so what would you say like is the last date to consume coffee, like after it's roasted?
It varies depending on the roasting. It varies depending on the bean itself and how it's stored. So it's. I mean, we do with the Lycka Coffee Club bags, the small brown bags. If I put them in the freezer, I can keep them in the freezer for months. That's coffee that is roasted and ground the same day and then packaged with nitrogen flushed bags, small bags. And if I put it in the freezer, I can drink it several months later, and I can't really.
We tried it. Yeah, we tested it. After 1 year, it was perfect.
So it's it's all about storage. And that's.
Can you store a whole bag of coffee in the freezer?
Yeah, for sure. It just depends on you want to make sure that you don't have any humidity sort of coming into it, because if you have, then the ice crystals are going to form, and that's going to obviously break the bean.
But say if you have like these vacuum like
basically. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then I mean, freezing green coffee as well. That's really a big trend, and these days with some of the best roasters on the planet, they bring in the fresh green and they put it straight into the freezer and keep all the green beans in the freezer. Because green bean, I mean, if the harvest and the drying and everything was performed properly, you can basically store green beans for up to a year, basically, in room temperature. But if you freeze it, you can keep it for many years.
That's really interesting, though. That's really cool. Maybe that's the future of coffee.
Cool.
Why don't we go down to the the roastery and show people around a little bit on how coffee roaster looks and what we do down there.
Do it.
And
Thanks.